take 2 minutes for an opening statement from each of you. We'll start with Cary.
Hi, everyone.
You need to turn, I'm sorry, you need to turn it back.
Okay, now is it on?
There it is. There it is. I hear that voice. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out on a beautiful night. And it's really a pleasure to be here. And I would make a snarky comment about being one of two candidates here, except for I bailed Saturday at the West Seattle Fair, so I can't throw stones. So I am running for mayor because I believe in the potential of this great city. In a building like this, when I hear the story of how the community came together to create this center, along with transitional housing, along with the food bank, it reminds me of how much I love this city and how important all of our contributions to making a better city are. We have so much potential. We have tremendous wealth being generated here. We have shared progressive values. We have a spirit of innovation. We have a commitment to community that I don't think exists anywhere else in the country. But we are becoming a city of haves and have-nots, of winners and people who feel like success is a party they weren't even invited to. And we need to do something about that. And now is the time, in this time of wealth inequality, in this time of housing unaffordability, to really look at what future city we want to become, develop an action plan to get there, discuss it, own it, and be part of making those solutions happen. Because we know what path we're on if we don't do something. We look at San Francisco to the south, and we look at Vancouver, BC to the north. Those are both examples of cities that did not get ahead of their housing affordability crisis. We don't want to be on that path. So I'm running for mayor because I believe in the power of people to implement bold solutions to be the transformative change we know we need in this city. I'm an urban planner, I'm an engineer, I'm a mom, and I have devoted myself to this city for the last 20 years, solving some of these big challenges with bold solutions, and I'm ready to bring that kind of leadership and that commitment to this city into the mayor's office. So I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Mike McGinn, and this is great. We can actually see the seconds tick down. This is the best timing we've seen at any forum yet. I live in West Seattle. I moved to Seattle 28 years ago with the woman who became my wife a few years later. We have 3 kids, and I went to the law school, became a lawyer in private practice, and became really involved with the Sierra Club, volunteering for them, really involved in my neighborhood association. I was president of the Greenwood Community Council for years, on the Northwest District Council. And one thing led to another. I formed a nonprofit, then I ran for mayor, which was an extraordinary experience. Since being mayor, I've been watching the growth that's been happening in this city. And if you remember, when I took office, we had deep unemployment, we had a deep recession, we had to make budget cuts just to maintain basic services and balance the budget. And I've seen the growth in the city's budget, and I've seen the affordability crisis we're facing. And it was giving me concerns, because rents and home prices are going through the roof. And the answer to every question from City Hall was another regressive tax. I mean, if you wanted to design a system that would drive people out of town, this is what it would look like. Growth that benefits the wealthy, with the impacts of growth paid for by those that are in the middle and lower income brackets. So what I want to do, if I get elected, is 1, get into the budget, review it, find savings, direct it to needed priorities and essential services, particularly for the homeless. I want to hold the line on regressive taxes, no increases in sales taxes, inflation only on property tax rates. And if we need more money, we should be looking at an income tax on the wealthy or taxes on the big corporations that are having such success in our city. I think if we start doing these things, we can start being more equitable about how we invest in our neighborhoods and our people. And I'm sure we're going to talk about affordable housing, homelessness, and specifics there, and I look forward to talking about that.
All right. So our first question is, in the last 3 years, the city budget has increased by $1.4 billion to an annual figure of $5.4 billion. Much of this increase has come from levies approved by the voters for specific purposes. How can the city be more transparent in informing the voters of how this money is being spent and if the anticipated results are being achieved? Well, start with Cary.
Excellent question, because it points to a real problem in our city. If you want to have public trust, you have got to be transparent and you've got to be accountable. And so yes, we voted for all these things because we're generous, because they're good things, because we need them, but the city needs to do a much better job reporting back to citizens. And it's not just with the levies. I think in general, the city, and with me as mayor, I will promise to do this, is we need to set a vision, we need to define an action plan, and a set of objectives that we're aiming for, the specific actions to get there, with metrics and with transparency, so that we report back to people on here's where we're headed, here's how we're doing, and here's where we're falling short and why, here's where we're achieving our goals. Because without that, how can we have public trust? I think with the levies, we need to make sure that we are doing that same kind of reporting, because that's a lot of money. The city budget, as Mike said, has increased 25% in the past 4 years. Where is that money going? And are we spending it wisely? Are we using the discipline we need to be using to make sure we're getting the best bang for the buck? We're not measuring things, so we're not reporting back, and we're all now mistrustful and doubting.
So one of the things I did when I took office was I learned that Mayor Nichols had performance agreements or accountability agreements with all the department heads, which had some metrics in it. But they were private. We actually put those up. We rediscussed those, put them up on the website. And so then the next step was to start putting metrics up on what objectives you were looking for from each department and whether they were being met. So I would take that same approach with the levies. So for the levies, what I would want to do is, line item them out to the greatest extent possible. What's the amount of money that is put aside for specific purposes within each levy? What's the timeline for spending on it? And then where are we on that timeline? How much have we spent and what has been produced to date? I don't think we're doing that yet with the levies. And I think that's something that you could do and just have updated on an ongoing basis from each of the departments to keep track of it. Now we know that, there's estimation in these budgets. They're not always, time's up. There we go. We can talk about this later.
Okay. Next question. Small businesses have been squeezed by an ever-increasing tax burden and added regulations. What policies or engagement practices will you implement to help assist our small business community to grow and prosper without having to do so outside the city limits of Seattle? We'll start with Mike on this one.
Yeah, I think the first thing here, it's 1 minute. That's why I got cut short last time. 1 minute on these. So the first thing I think you have to do is listen. And one of the things we did in the past, and I know I mentioned what I did in the past, but it's mainly just to show my style and approach, was we had industry sectors. We met with leaders in the industry sectors. And I think we need to meet with small business people in each neighborhood, hear their concerns. Rising rents and rising taxes, what I was describing earlier, affect small businesses too. So when I was talking about taxes on big corporations, I would raise the exemption on the B&O tax, exempt more small businesses from the B&O tax, and then raise the rate on larger corporations. That's one thing we could do. I think we could look at. The other thing is, I think we may just need to slow down a little bit on all the regulations. We've been, give a chance for the small businesses to absorb the minimum wage rate increases, the secure scheduling laws, and everything else. And it was one of the reasons why I was not a supporter of the soda tax.
So small business is the backbone of an economy that builds wealth and keeps wealth in community. And our city does not do a good enough job protecting, maintaining, nurturing, and expanding small business. It absolutely has to be a priority, and I don't quite understand why the Office of Economic Development isn't doing more, because there are so many great ideas for how to assist small business and how to make it, thriving, and because it's so essential. So I would propose looking at rent stabilization, because rising rents are driving out so many small businesses, especially retailers. I would look at forcing the new developments to have more small space, because the big spaces that they're building are aimed at large corporate chains and not small and local business. I would set up a lot more technical assistance to help businesses navigate all the new regulations. We've added a lot of new labor laws in the past 7 years, and people need help, especially immigrant and minority and refugee business owners who are just learning how to navigate the system. They need extra technical assistance. We should be looking at municipal Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi is expensive everywhere, and it's important and essential for most businesses to have access to cheap and high quality internet. And we do need a more steeply progressive B&O tax, where small business pays less and large corporations pay more.
Okay, so while we're on the subject of income tax, do you support the recently enacted ordinance establishing a city income tax on high earners? Do you agree with the council's methodology, or the methodology adopted by the council of basing the tax on line 22 of the 1040, which is the total income of the 1040 income tax form, as opposed to using line 37, which is adjusted gross income, for calculating this new tax burden on our small businesses?
So I am in favor of a more progressive tax code in our state and in our city. And whatever we can do to get that in motion, I am in favor of. We have the most regressive tax code in the country, where the wealthy pay the least and the poor pay the most. And we all know that's not fair. That is building a society that doesn't reflect our values and who we are. And so we have to get to the point where the wealthy are paying their fair share. I would look at a statewide capital gains tax, closing a lot of the useless tax loopholes that benefit corporations but do nothing in the public interest, looking at inheritance taxes and estate taxes, trying for a state income tax. Yes, it's good to start in Seattle because we have the momentum and the energy and the commitment to that kind of change. Let's start it here. It might not make it through the legal system, but I think it's important to start it here. Now, I have to be honest, I don't know exactly the difference between line 22 and line 37, but I do know we need to be taxing unearned wealth, the gains on stocks and bonds for high earners, not just wages, because we're never going to get to a fair system if we're letting the wealthy who earn their money from, basically not from working, but from letting their money grow. We have got to tax that wealth in addition to wages long term.
I'm guessing, Pete, I'm not exactly sure of this, but I'm guessing the difference is that, and I do support an income tax, and I support a much more progressive tax system in the state of Washington. We are deeply regressive, most regressive in the nation, and I think it's important for Seattle to lead. I think the difference is that because state law is restrictive on what cities can do, I think they've chosen the gross income rather than the adjusted gross income, because I think that they believe it makes it more legally defensible. I think if you use the adjusted, the latter number you gave, it's probably more fair. But I think that's why they picked that number, is because they want to try to make sure it withstands legal challenge. So I guess, so my answer to the question would be, I want it to survive a legal challenge, and if that's the best way to do it, yes. I think the ideal situation would be if we had a state income tax, and we did, then you could set it up a lot of different ways and could be very specific how to do it. This is just a huge challenge. Cities can only impose taxes that we get permission from the state to do, and the council's trying to thread the needle on this new income tax to try to get it passed, have it pass legal muster.
Yeah. I think the point that we were trying to get at with that question is for a lot of our members of the West Seattle Chamber, that are S corps, sole proprietorships, that they're going to be taxed on their pass-through income.
Right.
That's bad, sorry.
And
I
so
didn't understand
anyway,
that. Okay.
so that's where we were going. So
Yeah.
so I'd like to give you both 30 more seconds to address, because it's a huge concern for a lot of chamber members, and that was one of the things that there were a number of us that lobbied council over that last 10 days to try and get that more into the legislation. So
Okay. See, I want to ask them, and what did the council say? Because I just don't know enough details about the whys and wherefores about why they said no, but I do understand the concern you're raising about the unfairness of it, because then it captures income that may not be really income at the end of the day.
Same for me, and sorry I didn't understand that earlier.
well, it was a test. Okay, so in front of you on the table, there's two pieces of paper. There's a green one and a slightly red-colored one. So we're going to ask some yes/no questions. So, of course, if it's yes, you hold up the green piece of paper. If it's no, you hold up the red piece of paper. So the first question is the $15 minimum wage working as anticipated? Do you personally feel as overtaxed as our small businesses do?
Could you repeat the question?
Do you feel as overtaxed as our small businesses do?
I'm just guessing how you all feel. So all I know is how I feel, and I am concerned about rising property taxes, but my sense is from talking to people in the business community that they feel more strongly about it than I do. So that's where I am.
Yeah.
That's
I feel
where I am.
empathy, but not personally affected like you are.
Will you seek to reduce taxes and/or fees for our small business community?
Yes.
Seattle is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. Is this a good thing?
It's like good and bad right now, yeah.
Do you support grassroots neighborhood planning? Had to throw you a softball. Do you support?
I've done it, and I know Cary has too.
Yeah. Do you support HALA in its present form?
Yeah, that's a kind of 50. I got a positive and a negative. I got positives and negatives on HALA.
It's a good first step to get developers to contribute to affordable housing, but there's so much more we have to do, and we did not do enough input with neighbors around how to make it work in neighborhoods.
Or with schools.
I thought we started top down instead of doing more bottom up, and we didn't ask neighborhoods what were the investments they wanted to see to accompany growth. And I think that's an essential part of neighborhood planning.
All right, well, let's switch to a transportation question. What can be done, in your opinion, to ease congestion for egress and ingress to the West Seattle Peninsula?
Hey, Bob.
So we're joined by Bob Hasegawa. Sure. Well, why don't you two let him catch his breath, and then when we get to him, he can, huh?
He's memorized his opener. He's given his opener about 100 times. Yeah.
So I'll give you the choice. Do you want to? I just asked the question. If you want, we can go ahead and give you your 2-minute opening statement, and then go back to the question.
Okay, we'll give you. Let him catch his breath. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, West Seattle is a real challenge with just the high bridge and the low bridge, and then, you got to go quite a ways, and the water taxi as well. Light rail is funded, but I think the year is 2031. So one of the things I'm sorry, thank
I
you.
think it's more than that.
More than that, 2034, it's out there. I know that. I looked it up just a couple of days ago. So on my website, Getting Light Rail Done Faster, I've put up a plan by which we should start immediately the planning on the route and the alignment and the permitting. And we may have to put in a little bit of our own city money to get Sound Transit to do it. If we get that done quickly, then we can start talking with Sound Transit about how to get the money in there. The challenge from Sound Transit is not that it takes that long to build, is that they have to spend their money on other lines first. So we're going to have to get creative in financing. And I think we just have to keep working on how we improve bus connections over the bridge as well. I mean, the traffic, the number of cars isn't going away. We have to find ways to get more people through the corridor.
So 3 things. Number 1, we have got to get more funding into Metro for additional bus service. There's simply not enough bus service to West Seattle, to many neighborhoods, but West Seattle's probably in the worst situation of any neighborhood I've heard from around inadequate service. So just more service on Rapid Ride, and then more service from other neighborhoods to Rapid Ride, so that more people can take advantage of transit. Because people who work downtown would happily take the bus if they could find a seat. Second, speed up Sound Transit so that we can get our Seattle projects delivered sooner. So that means go through the planning and design process as efficiently as possible. The faster we start construction, the more money's left at the end for additional service. and look at Seattle using our bonding capacity to get our projects built sooner, because much of the delay is about the slow timeline of raising money. So if we can get money up sooner, we can build the whole thing a lot faster and build more. And then finally, compact growth. We have got to grow jobs and housing in balance, because if we're building bedroom communities where everybody's working downtown, we're just adding to the problem. So how do we keep jobs and housing in balance as we grow?
So Bob, the question is, what can be done to ease congestion for egress and ingress to the West Seattle Peninsula?
Yeah, I assumed that question just by the answers. I know West Seattle is one of those areas where it's like Ballard, you just can't get there from anywhere. So one of the things that, Mike talked about advancing, and the real problem with Sound Transit being the financing, but my plan is to create a publicly owned municipal bank. And one of the things that we could use the financing capacity that generates for is to advance the timeline for light rail into the West Seattle and Ballard areas. Transit is obviously the solution to getting people off the highways. So I think that there are more creative ways. One of the things is we can't get people on the buses because they're not reliable. And I was just talking with somebody in Olympia, actually, where they were saying that the buses are so crowded that oftentimes they just even pass the stops. I mean, it's just not usable. If you can't rely on that as a transportation source, then nobody's going to use it.
Okay, well, at this point, we'll take a bit of a break and let you do your 2-minute opening statement.
Well, thanks for your indulgence. I'm sorry I had legislative duties to attend to. I'm sorry to report that we will likely not have a capital budget. That's really sad because it's a $4 billion capital budget. $1 billion of that was earmarked for schools. And so it's in question whether or not we'll even be able to make our McCleary obligation. But that set aside, I would very much appreciate your support. I've been a lifelong Seattle resident, actually, just lived straight across 3 blocks north of Spokane Street on Beacon Hill, living in the house I grew up in. So I know the city. I love the city. It's been my home forever. And I've seen a lot of changes, and the neighborhoods are certainly changing. People are being displaced out of South Seattle, and North Seattle for that matter, for a couple of different reasons. First off, the city, we are good people with good hearts, and we want to fund noble projects, make sure that the homeless are tended to, and make sure that mental health needs are addressed. But we keep going back to the same regressive tax wells that we always go back to. And we don't do anything progressive like charge impact fees to offset their privatizing profits developers are and socializing the social costs of those profits that they're making. They need to put back into the communities to mitigate the effects that they're creating on our communities. So by going back to those same regressive tax walls, we're pricing the fixed income, low income, middle income people just out of the city. That on top of the appreciating values of the price of housing just itself is increasing property taxes in its own right. But the way to address that imbalance between supply and demand of many more people wanting to live here versus very much fewer places to stay is to increase our public housing stock, getting involved with public housing. So my financing plan is to create this publicly owned municipal bank that will give us the capacity to really address these issues. You can go to my website. We've just posted a white paper plan for how to implement this municipal bank. So thank you.
All right, thank you. So our next question is dealing with the tunnel. And how will you preserve the public asset of our waterfront for the benefit of the citizens of Seattle? And we'll start with Bob.
So I think you'll get no disagreement from the three of us here. We were all not enthusiastic about the tunnel itself. In fact, I think we're all pretty outspoken against it. I actually kind of like the viaduct. There was a plan there, that's like the people's view of the city. I know it's coming down, so that water is under the bridge. But there's some real serious problems coming up with, we're trying to preserve the public asset. I presume you mean that space along the waterfront as a tourist attraction and as a view site, but it seems like the wealthy property owners are getting most of the benefit of that. Hopefully they're going to open up that space and make it a public asset. But my problem is that, with the tunnel there, our natural asset, our greatest natural asset is the Port of Seattle. It's the only deep water natural port on the West Coast. And we have no way to get freight from the port to Ballard.
I personally am looking forward to having a beautiful waterfront. And the way it works is the state put in money to take care of the roadway. The city has to pay for between the roadway and the new seawall. And then the question is the other connections from the city down to the waterfront. Having said all that, I've been a skeptic of the plans because of the expense related to them. We're talking about how do we maintain Green Lake Community Center. People have been talking about privatizing it. The Parks Department says it has $67 million in maintenance costs across multiple community centers. I don't remember all of them exactly, but they're throughout the city and they don't have a funding mechanism. So my biggest concern with the waterfront is, I think that, right down there along the street itself, I think the street's too big. I think along the street itself, it'll be, between the street and the seawall will be nice, but we have to be watching the costs and being more equitable about making sure we get money into our neighborhoods.
So I've been involved in advocacy fighting for the future waterfront for 12 years, I think now. And the vision for tearing down the viaduct and building a transit-oriented transportation system to get West Seattle to downtown, to get Ballard to downtown, and to build 22 acres of great civic space in the waterfront was how I got involved in activism. So we didn't win on the transit fight. We were building a tunnel instead. But we did win on the waterfront fight, and I've been involved in planning and designing the waterfront since that time, and I'm incredibly proud of how it is 100% for public use, welcoming to all, free, a great civic space that represents our values, our connection to the water, our belief in everybody being welcome and included and invited to the party, and connecting the waterfront back into downtown. So I'm incredibly proud of the plan, and I think the funding is a mix of state funding, a mix of levy funding for the seawall, a mix of taxing local property owners to pay for it because they benefit most, and philanthropy. So the cost to the city is actually very small, and we got this great shared amenity. So I'm excited and proud to help make it happen.
Okay, so let's switch gears again. Present-day strategies in dealing with our homeless crisis do not seem to be working as we see an ever-increasing number of our neighbors living outdoors. Give us one example of what you would do differently to address this issue. We'll start with Cary.
I think going upstream to address the problem where it starts, because we all know we're pushing people into homelessness faster than we are helping them out. We helped 7,500 people out of homelessness in our city last year. We're never going to get ahead of the problem if we don't go to its root, which is we defunded mental and behavioral health services. We defunded transitional housing for people coming out of the foster system or coming out of incarceration or coming back from addiction services. We have a housing affordability crisis, and we don't have any protections for people who are facing eviction, especially families. We absolutely have to solve this problem at its root, keep people in secure housing, get transitional housing back in place, and build more of the emergency shelters like tiny house villages and low barrier shelters to help folks who are homeless now who want to come inside. We absolutely have to fund all of those things or we're never going to get ahead of the problem, and we'll continue to push people in faster than we help them out.
Yeah, I think that first fact is really important, is that our current systems are moving people out of homelessness, but so many more people are coming into it. And that's the nature of the crisis we face. And the other part of it is we really can't count on the state or federal government to come to the rescue. The Republican Congress is not, on our side, and Bob's report kind of brings that home as well. That's one of the reasons I want to get into the budget right away, is so that the first and foremost thing we have to do is we have to provide shelter for our people. A place that they can stay, which isn't in our parks or on our streets. And that will require mobilizing the resources at the city's disposal rapidly, and that's an experience I bring to the equation. And that will mean more low barrier shelters, all day shelters. So many of the shelters, people have to be out at like 5:30 or 6 a.m. So they're just spending their day trying to manage, their crisis. And if they had a stable place to leave their belongings and be all day, that would, and connect it to services, we could do better. So that's one major thing I would do.
So the problem with homelessness, there are numbers of ways why people end up on the street. 50%, over 50% of those over 50 were displaced out of their existing homes because the rent just got unaffordable. So the first rule of addressing homelessness is to keep people in your homes. So with a couple of the strategies I talked about earlier about not continuing to go to these regressive property tax increases that are happening to everybody. But, there's so many people that are just one paycheck away from homelessness as well, our contingent workforce. You could be making a good six-figure salary today, and if you're spending it all and haven't saved, and then your job goes away because we're all working under a contingent agreements now. There's no stable work anymore. People can't count on the fact it's not lifetime employment like it used to be back in the day. So we've got to plan ahead for those things. But wow, was that a minute already?
All right, so it's time to get out the red and green cards again. We're going to do another series of yes/no questions. Would you favor Sound Transit opting for a tunnel to the California Junction for light rail?
Could you repeat the question?
Would you favor Sound Transit opting for a tunnel to the California Junction for light rail?
If we can afford it.
Yeah, it depends on cost.
Yeah. That's what Northgate said too. Look who's getting a tunnel.
So you may get there, Pete.
Yeah, I mean, ST2 didn't call for tunneling.
Can I say the reason as well? Even though South Seattle got it at grade, but with freight mobility being such a crucial issue, we've got to separate the grade between the modes of transportation.
Okay. Do you favor the present plans for the redevelopment of Key Arena?
If we solve the transportation challenge.
Do you support spending city dollars to bring an NBA and/or an NHL franchise to Seattle? Struck a chord there. Should the Citizens Police Commission be given more power? Do you think foot patrols by Seattle Police Department would be an effective use of SPD resources? So while we're on, this is kind of a quality of life question. So based upon our citizens' experience, we're going back to questions now. So based upon our citizens' experience on July 4th with fireworks being illegal in the city of Seattle and this law not being enforced, should the city move to legalize them and add the tax revenue to SPD enforcement efforts?
I would rather we enforce the rules that we have now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we do that?
I think we have to make it a priority, a higher priority, because right now, obviously, it's not. They're not enforcing anything, and it's unpleasant in a lot of neighborhoods, especially West Seattle, and I think we need to spend some effort on enforcement.
So this is, I think, one of these cases where, rules and public attitudes, this is the challenge. You have to have the public attitudes so that a rule can be enforced. It's kind of why marijuana's legal now. It's like, even though it was illegal, most people thought, oh, that's not so bad. So I think it's ultimately starts with, I think, some type of popular or public movement around changing attitudes around fireworks. I personally am not a fan, but there's so many people who want to do it, and there's no real social, negativity towards it. There's just all this social, it's like it's a thing you do. So that's where I would start. I wouldn't start with asking the police to enforce an unpopular rule. I would think about how do we get together the people who think it's wrong and start changing public attitudes. Kind of like smoking too, right? You couldn't ban smoking in a theater until everybody thought it was a bad idea. And then you could ban smoking in a theater. So that's, I think, the same place we have to go with fireworks.
Yeah, so what bugs me is they're trying to ban vaping. There's no science behind that. But at any rate, that's a different story. So to me, this is one of those issues that I think there should be local control. I think that coming from the top-down decision, take the Chinatown International District, for instance. They're shooting firecrackers their strings last for 10 minutes when they're blowing, literally tens of thousands of firecrackers in a string. I think that if we make the decision, push the decision-making down to the neighborhood council levels, which I really want to re-energize as community organizing tools, and give the neighborhood councils more control over what their neighborhoods look like. Not every neighborhood is the same. So we have to understand that if we get away from this top-down model of corporate structure of governance that we've morphed into to a more small d democratic model from the bottom up, and let the people decide what they want in their own neighborhoods. And then, once that decision is made, we got to enforce the decision if it is to ban them.
So did you see my questions? Well, I'm just curious, because this next question, you'll understand why I asked that. So, do you envision your administration revitalizing the Department of Neighborhoods to make it more interactive with our neighborhoods again? And we'll start with you.
Okay, I'll take just keep on rolling. Yes, absolutely. That's one of the fundamental tenets of my campaign. I was a Bernie Democrat, elected national delegate for Bernie Sanders, which is about localizing control and putting democracy back into our governance structure, which right now we don't feel like we have. It's totally corporatized, i.e. top-down power flow. I'm all about bringing democracy back, and a couple other things, people need to feel like there's hope that we can recapture our democracy back, because the way folks are feeling right now, it's almost a sense of futility. Why should we even get engaged in politics? Because big money is making decisions at the top, and even if they ask for our opinion, it's not really ever considered. So we need to have an authentic democratic base, which is what the neighborhood councils would represent, and give them the resources to go out and do that community organizing.
I was a Bernie Democrat too. I didn't go to the national convention, but I went on Fox News for Bernie, so I should get comment for that. I mean, that's good, right? There we go. Absolutely, we should reinvigorate that. And I was on the Northwest District Council for years, and I thought it was just really disrespectful, the way in which the city acted. And I understand, from my own experience, how hard it can be to get good diversity out to all of the meetings, but these are volunteers who are committed to their neighborhoods, and they should be respected. And the challenge then is how do you make sure you have other practices and other types of outreach, so you make sure everybody's being heard from, because our neighborhoods are incredibly diverse, and everybody deserves a voice. And so far as I can tell, everybody in the city lives in a neighborhood at the end of the day. So, who speaks for neighborhoods is really all of us. So we have to make sure we hear from all of us in the process. I think that's a job not just of the Department of Neighborhoods. I think it's a job from the mayor's office. I did over 100 town halls. I stood right here and just took Q&A, in this building, come one, come all, and I bring department heads with me as well as Department of Neighborhoods. I think there should be an attitude throughout government to have that type of interactivity with communities.
I agree. I think the neighborhood planning process that we had in the 90s was a national model. And Jim Deers, who used to run the Department of Neighborhoods, is still on the lecture circuit talking about how to have healthy community process that we invented here and then we killed because why? I have no idea why we got rid of it, because it worked beautifully. It was a great structure. It brought people together towards envisioning a positive future vision for their neighborhood and an action plan to get there. And there were professionals from the city working with amateurs or citizens from the neighborhood, defining together the shared future of the neighborhood. And then there were grants you could go after, small and simple grants and neighborhood matching fund grants to implement projects. It's a great model, we should bring it back, and with the challenges around diversity, it's not that hard to solve those challenges. You develop liaisons in the community to help recruit people and inform people. You develop mentorship relationships for newcomers who don't have master's degrees in urban planning. You have a city staff person in the neighborhood available to help and bridge the gaps. And you just do the staffing for the outreach that needs to happen to create healthy community. It's not that hard. You just have to invest in it and you just have to commit to it, because we all want an inclusive, healthy society, and we know how to make it work.
Okay. I've got one more question that I'm going to ask, and then we'll open it up if folks in the audience have a question they'd like to ask. So if you'll just kind of line up down here so we can get you on the mic so that everybody can hear you. So my next question is, as Seattle changes, what essential Seattle-ness would you most like to preserve? We'll start with Cary.
I think our socioeconomic mix. I think when I first moved here in 1987, the idea that we could be a city of working class, blue collar folks and artists and tech people and professionals and musicians and all rub shoulders together, all live in the city together, and it was fine if you didn't have much money. It was fine, if it just, people lived at all income levels together easily in this city, and it feels like that we're losing that. It feels like as things get so expensive, places get more and more exclusive, and people at lower income levels are being pushed out. It's almost like it's illegal to be poor in this town anymore, and I don't think that's okay. I think we have to make sure we fight for affordability, we fight for a sense of inclusion and togetherness, and we fight for keeping artists, for keeping musicians in our community, and mostly we fight for people of color and for immigrants and refugees who are the first and the hardest hit by the affordability crisis. It's not okay they're being pushed out. We've got to fix that.
So I've lived in Seattle for 28 years, so not a native, but a long time. And my kids are natives, all three of them, I suppose. I always thought the city was really open. That was what was so appealing to me. There was, that you could show up, and it wasn't like where I grew up on the East Coast, where you felt there were really, you had to have a pedigree to get into certain places, or you had to be from the right school to get into certain places. Seattle just felt like it was a place that was open and welcoming, and that you could make something of yourself here. And I think of, like the music scene, like that artists could come here and perform, or that, I was invited down for the 40th anniversary of the first Vietnamese that came here, who were greeted by earlier immigrant groups to help them resettle here. Like that was who we were. And I think we're losing that. Like this isn't a place you can just come to and start something up and make something of yourself. And we're worried about the people here being forced out. And then after openness, I would say idealistic. I think we're an idealistic city. And I would hate to lose that. I would hate to ever become cynical.
Hello? My first instinct was to say diversity, but in deeper reflection, I think that sense of community that used to be here when I was growing up. I tell these stories about what my neighborhood used to be like back in the day, and there used to be lots of kids playing, not just in the yards, but on the streets, because it was safe. You didn't have cars blasting up, and we used to play kickball using the manhole cover on the street. My dad would send me up to the corner grocery store. How many communities have little corner grocery stores anymore? And we've lost that sense, and so we've become a society of individualism rather than community. And I hope that we can bring community back to our core essence, and that's what I think the neighborhood councils can really accomplish.
Okay, with our first audience question.
I'm Leslie Harris. I'm the elected school board director for West Seattle and South Park. I'm the vice president of the school board. I am asking my questions as an individual. Only the president speaks for the school board. I got a couple of them if I could. What do you think about the HALA process that the schools are not part of when we have a stunning capacity crisis for 54,000 kids in 102 schools? And right now, the day we opened Genesee Hill, brand new school, last September, we're hanging them from the light fixtures. Second, what do you think about the high administrative costs running the Seattle Pre-K program and the fact that we only have a few that are integrated with special ed? 3, how are you going to partner with the schools?
We'll give you a minute and a half. So we'll start with Bob.
Okay, so on the HALA question, I don't believe in HALA, actually, so I don't think that it's working at all in the regard that you're talking about. The pre-K administrative costs, I wasn't in favor of the city council's proposal when they created that. I was more in favor of the SEIU proposal, which actually approached a lot more, what made available to preschool to a lot more youth. I think the one that the city council actually passed was, or the people ended up supporting through an initiative, was only like 400 kids or something. I mean, it was minuscule compared to the need. What was the third question again now?
Special ed in Seattle Pre-K, and how are you going to partner with the school district if you're the mayor?
Well, I believe the education should be left to the professionals. So I don't think that the city should be mingling in that. That being said, what the city can do is get involved with the wraparound and support services and social services to make sure that when the child gets into the classroom, they're well prepared to learn.
So the partnering with this, first of all, there's this barrier, obviously, of financing between the city and the schools. Like there's limits on what we can spend money on, and there are things we can spend money on, and that's a challenge. And it was a challenge we faced when we worked to expand the Families and Ed Levy, and which we did. My method of partnering was, twofold. One was bottom up. We did the Youth and Family Initiative. We went out into the community. We ultimately heard from over 3,000 people in small groups about what they needed for their kids to succeed. Some of those were in the schools, like health centers, which are now in all the high schools and in the middle schools in the less advantaged areas. Others were the wraparound services that Bob was talking about. Some went to the classroom. And I guess I'm saying that because it's a big challenge on the school building side. I think we can partner with sharing data and understanding where growth is going to occur, demographic data and the like, to try to work with the school district on that. We can help ease permitting and see what we can do on joint planning to accommodate more students, because this is a crisis as well. The other thing I did on the partnering was I met monthly, or tried to meet monthly. We had multiple superintendents with the superintendents, as well as with others in the education arena, so we can identify issues. And finally, on the pre-K, it felt to me like that was rushed out because somebody was up for re-election that year and needed a signature achievement. I think a little more work needed to be done on that before it was put out for a vote.
So capacity at schools and HALA, I agree, we have not done a good enough job understanding growth, understanding demographics, planning ahead for schools. And I don't know why we don't do a better job. We absolutely should be doing a better job. But I want to just point out, I think, the city planning department needs to be taking ownership of all these issues. Transportation planning, thinking about livability, thinking about housing affordability, compact growth. Those are all things that we need to be doing with excellent planning, and HALA was kind of aimed mostly at affordability, and it was a very narrow part of it. I think we need to step back and look more broadly at all the parts of planning and make sure we're doing them all together. With pre-K, like Bob said, I was in favor of the SEIU proposal, which I think would have served a lot more kids, and it would have allowed a lot more of the, the culturally competent childcare that that communities of color and immigrant and refugee communities rely on in their community, in their homes. It would have allowed them to be part of the process, which I think is essential. It could have served a lot more kids. So since this is a pilot project, I hope we're looking with the right metrics at how this is working, and we're ready to jettison what's failing and scale up what's working, because we absolutely need to create a much better system for pre-K that serves a lot more children. And partnering with the schools, what these guys have said about, the wraparound services, I think is essential. It's what the city can do, and it's what we need to do, especially for low-income families and kids and communities of color. We've got to look with a racial equity lens and a social justice, economic equity lens to make sure we're investing our money in the kids that need the most.
Thank you.
Hi. I think it's appropriate to talk about arts, being as we're at an arts center. The city funds a lot of youth arts programs. They give a lot of money to just do one-day events and classes and that sort of thing. But there's always been a lack of teaching these kids how to use the skills they're learning to make money. So now in 2011, this was brought to the then mayor at the time, Mike McGinn, and you may recall that a work readiness in the arts program was launched in 2012, which, So the question is that that program was actually ended last year. Ed Murray ended the funding that took kids, taught them arts, but also taught them career tracks and how to network to make money. So that was ended last year. What are your thoughts on that program? Would you revive it or something like that? That's my question. Thank you.
Let's start with Mike.
Yes, since that was my program, absolutely we should look at it again. This is, and not to be facetious, I really believe in arts. My mom was trained in the arts. I'm not terribly artistic, but I have an appreciation for it as part of youth development and as part of the vibrancy of the city. We launched something called Creative Advantage. We help pay for it, which brings art, with the school district, which brings art programs into the schools, paid for out of the admissions tax, like at the Chihuly Museum and the Great Wheel and other places like that. I also really believe we need to be teaching our young people skills and not just the academics, and broad skills that are life skills around finances and job hunting and entrepreneurialism, as well as what used to be called home economics. And I think every young person should learn that, as well as skills that could lead towards trades in the future as well. We have to expand that, and that's something I'd like the city to be able to look at, skills centers in the schools and supporting that type of expansion.
Bob?
Speaking about this place, I know Randy Engstrom used to be the director here, and he was my classmate at the Evans School, just thought I'd point that out. But he is now the director of the Arts Commission for the City of Seattle, and we talk a lot about supporting the arts. And one thing that, to me, supporting art is like supporting humanity. What drives me crazy is this whole focus on STEM. It's not that I got issues with STEM, it's just that it shouldn't be all STEM focused at the expense of what makes us human. So we have to find ways to support artists and to be able to make sure that artists can make a decent living doing the craft that they love, which enriches all of the livability of Seattle as well as our lives. We should also be probably looking at creating affordable housing for artists who can then gather and build synergies of their creative juices.
Cary?
Yes, funding arts and arts education for kids is absolutely essential. Art and being creative, that's how you learn how to create a better world. That's how you learn how to invent a different reality and something to look forward to in the future. And the critique from art is how we learn about ourselves, how we learn about our culture. So I think having that skill embedded in our youth from kindergarten forward is absolutely essential, especially in communities of color. And yes, definitely we need to look at how do you use those skills and turn them into how to earn a living. And I think that's something we could work with the tech industry on, because they're in the business of inventing, and they need creative people coming out of our school system. So I don't think it's necessarily against STEM, but along with STEM, like, we need to be really investing in teaching kids how to invent and how to be creative. So definitely bring that program back and definitely fund it as robustly as possible.
Pete, I'd like to have Bob Hasegawa answer the first question you asked the other two members about accountability and funding. And you don't know what that is? I can't remember your question, so if you give it to me, I'd ask it. The other question I have for you, if you become mayor, you have quite a bit of different ideas. What will you do with the current directors, and where will you go to look for replacements?
Good.
What was the second part of that question? Where would I go to look for replacements?
Yes, where would you pursue the people you'd hire to replace those individuals?
So one of the things about leadership, especially of large organizations like the city, is you have to provide the vision. And without a vision, it's just a mechanism or a structure. The vision is, you have to surround yourself with people who share that vision. So I would be vetting the people who would be reporting directly to me to make sure that they share the same vision of how I want democracy and small d government to put the people back in charge of the decisions that they're making, so they can't be control freaks. They have to be also, though, a manager has to be pretty much a jack of all trades. You've got to have fiscal, smart, savvy. You also have to have people management savvy. So not just sharing the vision. And so to get, where would you go? I put out the all call. I'm not exclusive. I'm not out to headhunt necessarily, but I will insist that the people will support the changes that we're trying to make with the city.
So when I won office the first time, as you may know, I was pretty much an outsider. I've been active on boards and commissions and things. So, we kept a fair number of people. A number of people left. We did searches, and so that kind of informs my answer. For example, in the arts side, we did a big national search, and we ended up with somebody that really just didn't fit. And then we ended up hiring Randy Angstrom. So I think this time, having spent 4 years in office and 4 years still remaining engaged, what I'd be looking is for the really talented people within the city. I'd want to have a very diverse group of people. I'd want to have creative people. What Bob said as well, I don't like directors who try to hold everything in to themselves and defend it. I want ones that are going to be open and collaborative with other departments as well. So those are the traits I'd be looking for. And, it's great if you can find some star from afar, and you probably ought to, be able to look for it. But in my experience, finding people within the region that had the talent and that you knew and that kind of had Seattle values were the people that could get the most done the fastest.
Cary?
I think the employees of the city of Seattle are a national treasure. There are 11,000 people, and most of them are fantastic, 100% committed to public service, 100% committed to making Seattle the best city it can be. So I think the task is largely one of leadership and being the kind of manager who can invite everybody to come to the table with their best ideas and their best commitment, with a sense of trust and a sense of being appreciated, being respected, and in a shared kind of quest for creativity and discovery together. And the leadership challenge of the city of Seattle, I think, is one of the most important things to look for in the next mayor, because we are in the midst of a big transformation in a time of flux, and we need everybody pulling in the same direction. So setting a strong vision, or what I call a big what and a small how. So setting the big vision, but then inviting everybody to be part of figuring out the action plan to get there is the way to lead our city through this time of flux. So I would expect most city directors would want to stay and be involved in that. There's a few who I think are on their way out of town already, and happy to let them go and do a national search to find the replacements.
Thank you. My name is Ted Barker. My question's on housing affordability. During the campaign, not just amongst you, but all the candidates and in general, there's been a lot of talk about, the affordable housing requirements in HALA, building, city-owned, low-income housing, rent stabilization, all these things are great. But under best-case scenarios, these are programs that are gonna help people pay that August 1st rent in the years 21 or 22 or 23. We are bleeding people right now. There are people, obviously some are becoming homeless, and that's a real focus of attention, as it should be. But on a lower profile, you know, there's a lot of people who can't pay the rent in 10 days. They're gonna wind up in Kent, Tukwila, Renton, and not to diss on any of these cities, but they wanna live in Seattle and we want them here. I mean, what's the tourniquet that we can have to stop these people from having to leave in the short term?
Cary?
That's a really important question and a really hard one. So 2 things I think we could look at doing right now is emergency rent stabilization. I don't know how to make it work, but if we can make clear to people this sense of urgency that we're in this crisis, not only are people, you know, they can't sleep at night because they don't think they can make rent, they also don't have enough money to move. So they're just trapped in this terrible situation that's toxic, because being housing insecure is incredibly stressful and difficult, especially for families. So can we look at something like an emergency, you know, rent stabilization until we get ahead of this? And then I've been pushing really hard on understanding the degree to which speculation is escalating housing prices, and we need to get that solution in place quickly, because, you know, everyone's taking advantage of our hot housing market and using it to escalate prices for their own gain, and we need to figure out a way to block that speculation activity, the people and corporations that are buying housing just for that rise in value and not even to live in. So we got to block that, and because that's part of the rapid escalation.
Mike?
You know, I think part of the answer is in public housing. If we use it, if the money we raise is used to buy existing properties and start managing them ourselves, not just construct new, and that's something I think we could look at as well. And you know, that's one piece. The other piece is looking at, and I know the other pieces take a little longer. Unfortunately, every piece is going to take a certain amount of time just because of the pace of legislative processes alone. You know, we are so far behind, and I think it's like 500 new people a week coming to this city. And you know, it's a game of musical chairs, except it doesn't go to the speedy, it goes to the wealthy. And that's the challenge we face right now. So I also think we should be looking at, you know, what are the things we can do right now to make it easier for people who own existing housing stock to open, you know, rent out apartments within it and things like that. Because its building is going to take time as well. All of this is controversial. You know, we're going to have a little bit of a conversation amongst ourselves of, are we prepared to do hard things fast? Because it's not just the mayor and the council, the public's got to be part of this answer.
Bob?
So yes, we do need this transitional housing until we can build an adequate stock of public housing. And there are things that we can do, like the former mayor said about purchasing existing vacant homes, or doing things like we talk about land trusts, but that, you know, what I'm thinking about is the fact that this situation is by design. This didn't happen by accident. The whole HOLA program and our inability to deal with this crisis up until this point is almost impossible. It's like turning a battleship on a dime. The momentum is going one way. We've got to first stop the bleeding and make sure that we can keep people in their homes so that they don't end up on the street. But then the question you raised, which is a valid one, is how do we house those people who are on the street right now? It's a regional problem. We can't assume the entire thing, but what we can do is look at, we can even open up schools if that's what it takes for temporary shelter until we can get enough housing capacity.
Hi, my name is Steven. I'm a welder for the Sheet Metal Union, Local 66. I live in Beacon Hill. My question is, how do you feel about safe injection sites in the future of Seattle? And what can Seattle do to help at-risk youth find employment and education and apprenticeships in the future?
Start with Bob.
So yes, I support safe injection sites. as far, I don't know if you would need a more in-depth answer, but the second question about supporting at-risk youth so that they have an economic future. I think that's essentially the problem, is that they don't feel like they have a future. And when you're feeling powerless in a system that requires power to get ahead, you end up going alternative routes or looking for alternative paths to power, i.e. banding with people that may not be your best allies within the legal system. So we have to start providing hope and opportunities. So there are things like CTE that we should be support, career technical education process. It's not trying to push all the youth into this one bubble that says if you don't go to college you're worthless, right? There are apprenticeship training programs that we can be preparing our youth so that they can actually get into real apprenticeship training programs.
So, this is something I've been talking about recently. Well, yes, on the safe injection sites, I do support them because the data is that it saves lives and that there's an opportunity for people to potentially connect to get services. On connecting with our youth, I've been talking to people that have been involved in the Seattle Youth Violence Prevention Initiative. It was started under Greg Nichols. We took it on and expanded it. And basically, it's being defunded a piece at a time. And what it did was, that kind of, it brought together multiple agencies and multiple providers to have case management for youth at risk of violence. And, the next step was to extend it to older age groups. Right now, shots fired in the city have gone up 65%. Year to date, this year is 213 shots. That's, 65% more than it was 3 years ago. There were 2 people murdered at Rainier Playfield. There were 30 shots fired down at Golden Gardens on a summer night. This is something that we need to be on. This is also an emergency right now. And 1 minute doesn't do it justice, but there's a lot of things I do. But the first one is the city should acknowledge it's a problem and make it a priority and start reinvigorating those programs.
Cary?
So I'm with Brother Mike and Brother Bob on this 100%. Yes, safe injection sites, but we also need to be investing money in addiction treatment services because a lot of these young people also can't afford treatment and they might be ready for treatment, but it's incredibly hard to get treatment as a low-income person. So yes, we need to be doing so much more to help at-risk youth. I think we've all acknowledged we have this economy that's creating despair, that is creating a sense of hopelessness in young people. So long-term, we have to fix that with local procurement, local hire, free community college, training and apprenticeship programs, training for local Seattle kids to get the 30,000 open Amazon jobs right now. There's so many things we could be doing to build a system where kids from this city, especially low income and kids of color, have access to all this wealth and prosperity we're creating. But we've kind of abandoned that responsibility. If you look at what the Office of Economic Development does right now, you just sort of scratch your head at why? Why not this? This is the single most important thing they should be doing. And under my administration, that will be the focus of jobs for kids and small and local business.
I'm Katie Busey. I'm a rental property owner, and I have been offering way below market rents to, for instance, my last one was a single dad with a couple of kids. I'm not a dirtbag landlord, but it sure feels like the city of Seattle is waging a war against landlords. The latest thing is that landlords will be prevented from doing criminal background checks on prospective tenants. I know there's some good reasons for it, but it puts a huge risk on a property owner. How could you possibly stem the tide of this war on landlords and work more collaboratively with us so that we could solve some problems with homelessness?
Cary?
So I completely agree with your assessment that we've done a little bit too much blanket condemnation of landlords. Many landlords, especially local, small mom and pop landlords, are part of the solution. They are not the problem. And we need to be a little bit more fine-grained with these solutions that are aiming for social justice. There's a good reason to, welcome people who've served their time in prison and have paid their debt, welcome them back into society, but we have to do it in a way that's not creating more problems for local people who are trying to help. And so I think the biggest issue we need to focus on is we need to keep property as much as possible in local ownership. Local landlords are good. Local landlords they generate wealth, they keep it in community, they're a healthy part of society. So whatever we can do to support local landlords and kind of make that system continue to work, I think we need to do. So that means sitting down with local landlords, understanding how to craft legislation that works for you and also solves the social justice challenge we're trying to address. But, the big corporate landlords, that's the enemy. That's what we need to be fighting against.
Mike?
Yeah, I would agree that, in fact, it would be great if we had more locally owned small rentals in this city to help deal with the issue. We saw, I think Sightline did a study that says there's something like 214,000 empty bedrooms in King County, right? Because homes have gotten bigger and families have gotten smaller. We've got this huge mismatch, and that was what I was referring to earlier. That it would be nice if we could use existing property, get more of that available to people more quickly. I think there are, as you said, there are good reasons behind and why people are pushing. One of the things I think we should look at is we should talk to small local landlords, because the issue of risk is not such a big one for somebody who has 3 or 4 or 500 units. But should we be looking at the city creating some type of risk pool and helping indemnify or insuring or assisting in dealing with risk, so that it's not a make or break thing for a landlord if they comply with the law. So that's one thing I think we should look at and do that in conjunction with small landowners, rental owners.
Bob?
Yeah, so there is good reasons, like as you said. So acknowledging that those reasons exist. That being said, we need to work with small landlords, because if we're going to move forward on, say, mother-in-law apartment strategies or detached accessory dwelling unit strategies, that's one thing. But I know that there are these other companies. I know a person who worked for a company that was buying up like 100 homes a day and converting them. And there's only so many houses to buy, but they just went all in and just bought up everything they could. So now there's one landlord, a holding company that owns thousands of homes in our area, and they're the ones that are in a lot of ways driving the prices up. So, it's almost like apples and oranges. We have to deal with small, I shouldn't say small landlords, but small volume landlords differently than we deal with the industrial landlords that are out there.
I have a question that's there's a lot of discussion on neighborhood processes and decision making. I'm curious how you would balance the needs of citywide priorities against the neighborhood planning processes. I'm thinking of things like density and addressing some of those concerns, or safe ingestion sites we just talked about. How do you balance the need to have those decisions made and the desire of neighborhoods to frequently not have them there, but have that exist somewhere across the city?
I'll start, if you don't mind. I think it starts with how you frame the question. So when we invite neighbors to come together to talk about our city and our neighborhood, and I think we need to start with a constructive future vision, that we are aiming to be a city that is inclusive, that is creative, that's welcoming, that's committed to shared prosperity and sustainability. We need some statement like that defines what we're aiming for. And then we need to talk about the growth is happening, people are moving here, these are some kind of unchangeable facts about what's going on in our world. And then have a conversation together with a facilitator about how do we keep what's essential and important about our culture, our character, what we love about community and supporting one another, while also welcoming folks in, knowing that a healthy society requires that we have people at all income levels and all ages and stages of life, and creating that kind of healthy interweaving of community. So if we start with that kind of set of principles and set of goals, then we can have a much different conversation than we've been having in some neighborhoods, where it's people coming to the table to protect self-interest. So I think having a constructive conversation and inviting people to that is essentially the biggest change we need.
Mike?
I appreciate you asked the question, because it's actually a really critical one. Whenever the city is working with a neighborhood on what happens next in the neighborhood. Because there are city, indeed regional interests. That's why we have a Growth Management Act, right? And a a statewide one, and a growth management plan. So I think, one, that has to be part of every conversation. I don't think you can say, and I have certainly never meant to say, when we need to listen to neighborhoods and consult with neighborhoods, that means that, neighborhoods get a veto power or the last word necessarily, because, I look at something like Roosevelt, which has a great neighborhood association, and they got a light rail line coming in, which is a regional multi-billion-dollar investment. So there's a regional interest in what happens there as well, and that has to be balanced. And I think it's also then how you construct your processes, which I was alluding to earlier when we were talking about the district councils and the community councils. I mean, you need to find a way for renters to be at the table saying, I need a place to live. And when you have a conversation that's community members talking to community members, and you've really brought everybody in the room, usually people in this city are of good faith and start responding to the larger concerns. If it's perceived as top-down, the city's telling a neighborhood what to do, then neighborhoods get really territorial and resentful. And trust me, I've been through this. Yeah, you should hit this one again. I did that ding until I stopped. I feel really strongly about this one. I feel really strongly about this one.
So yes, I do believe it's how you construct the process, and I do believe in the good faith of people to acknowledge that we need to address social responsibilities. So that being said, I would use a time-tested model. It's called money. And so what I would do is, in order to engage the neighborhood councils, as I talked about before, I want to implement a participatory budgeting process, and give the neighborhood councils, once they get to a representative level, that they actually do represent the neighborhoods that they represent, give them a sizable chunk of their own budget to write for themselves, which is a privilege. But in return for that privilege comes the responsibility of making those tough decisions on how you're going to deal with the density that is inevitably coming and the social problems that also come with some of that density. So then it's on the people themselves to make those decisions, and that's part of that bottom-up empowerment process.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Barbara Pascucci, and I never speak up at anything public, so this is really hard for me. And I have a million questions, so I'm not even sure what my question is. But in regards to HALA and the way that it's planning on changing the West Seattle neighborhood, and we already have more development than most parts of the city, when I look at the livability aspects as part of that, which means parks, green spaces, transportation that works. I mean, going to meetings, I found out from some people that live near the rapid ride lines that they can't park by their house anymore because people come and park there. So they can get on the rapid ride because there are no arterials to take. So, okay, and the question is, if you were mayor, would you, I view it as a total giveaway to big investment developers. Would you put the reins on HALA?
Bob?
Yes, I would. I've been, at first, coming from the state legislature, you don't pay that close of attention to what's going on because my focus was down there. But as I started learning more and more about HALA, it became very obvious to me that it is a giveaway to the developers. And it's totally the wrong strategy to employ if we're trying to create enough housing to relieve the burden of the gap between supply and demand. So, in fact, if you look at the HALA that was agreed to, I don't know what the number was agreed to here in West Seattle, but in South Lake Union it was like a 2% set aside. And how I view that is kind of a slap in the face to poor people, saying we don't want poor people living in our community. 2% affordable housing, that's ridiculous. So what HALA is doing is expecting developers to do something that is not in their own self-interest, and that's never going to happen. So I think the only way we can really deal with this issue is invest significantly in building public housing so that we control the rents and we can make sure that the first floors for small businesses are affordable as well as the people living in them.
Mike?
Yeah, my biggest critique of HALA, again, is that it was, from the top, and I think the goal is admirable. We do have to figure out how to build more housing for people.
Everybody wants affordable housing.
Everybody wants affordable housing. We have to figure out how to do it. But I also think we had to go out and listen to people and have a dialogue with them, on a neighborhood level, on how do they think it fits within their neighborhood, as well as what are the investments they want to see in their neighborhood to accompany growth, and what are the changes. And it might be parks, it might be public safety, it might be small business development. But I don't think we had that. I know we didn't have that listening at the front end. It was presented as a top-down thing, and I don't agree with that. Although I do think that we, as you were acknowledging, we have to figure out a way to accommodate the people that are moving here. Otherwise, it's just going to be bad. And I agree with Bob on the public housing as well. We have to build more public housing. And thank you for asking the question.
Cary?
I agree the process by which it was designed and rolled out was a massive failure, because we needed to have a citywide conversation about how do we accommodate growth, similar to what we did in neighborhood planning. I'll go back to that again, that if you invite people to the table with a constructive future vision and say, how do we do this together, people will act in good faith and come forward and identify solutions. But the issue with housing affordability, HALA was never going to do anywhere near enough to get really at the affordable housing we need. So we absolutely have to do the tax on speculation to stop that part of escalation in prices. We have to invest in the Housing Trust Fund and philanthropy to build nonprofit affordable housing. We absolutely have to get public funds to build public housing on surplus city-owned land. And then we have to do a much more fine-grained look at how do we build infill development, low-rise multifamily development in neighborhoods that fits with their neighborhood character. So we could be doing a lot more than these ugly 4-packs over a garage court with duplexes, row houses, backyard cottages. There's a lot more we could be doing that is appropriate and people would welcome as neighbors.
Okay, and our last audience question.
Hello, my name is Natasha Savage, and I am a 25 years worker for City of Seattle and State of Washington, and still doing both. My question is, first of all, I want to thank you, Mike, for opening Refugee and Immigrants Department for City of Seattle. A lot of people took really credit for that, but thank you. So I just want to ask the question, right before my eyes, the Department of Homelessness was open, which takes millions of dollars. And as you all just said, homelessness going up instead of going down. And we're spending millions there on administration of that department. What is your plan for that department? What are you going to do with that department?
Start with Cary.
So there were 2 recent reports done about homelessness in Seattle, and there were some flaws in how they did their work, but one thing that they were clear on was that we have 120 different service providers, and we have very siloed money that comes from the city and from the philanthropic arena to service providers, and we probably have a lot of inefficiency and duplication of effort. So somehow we've got to bring all the service providers together and talk about the funding that's available, talk about how do we work together better, and share staff, share operations, share resources, share data, so that we are getting a lot more service out of the money we are spending. I think we know we have to do that. And second, we need to look at all the emergency shelters that people absolutely need. 90% of the people outside would come inside if they had a space. So we've got to look at how do we expand tiny house villages and sanctioned tent encampments in neighborhoods, because even though they're not ideal, they're better than sleeping in an unsanctioned encampment. And I could go on and on. There's a lot more to talk about, but I think those are the first 2 things to work on.
Mike?
So I do think we have to look at how we're spending our money on homelessness and look at with a data-driven approach. Try to understand what's working and where, but also understand that there's so many different reasons people come into homelessness and different reasons they come out. that there is some complexity to it, but we should strive to have the dollars follow what the data tells us is working with different populations. The other question I'm hearing, I think, is, there's just an issue in looking at the size and growth of the budget. How much of it is going, towards direct services? How much is going towards administration and management? And, the mayor's office budget itself has gone up 80%. I saw where the city council, when they went from representing the whole city to a portion of the city, they added a staffer each because they said it was more work. Because now they had to answer all the constituent mail, is what they said. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. And I think if you look at, that's one of the things I want to do when I get into the city, is try to look across the city budget and see what efficiencies we can find in the management level. I had to do it before, I did it then. I look forward to trying to do it again.
Bob?
Yeah, so the city is great at creating these things that try to make us feel warm and fuzzy about the things that we're doing. Department of Homelessness is another one of those things where I think they hired a director and they're paying the director some like $140,000. 200,000. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, well, my point is, and Mike made this point, is the money going to direct services or is it going to administration? And is it really taking on this issue of homelessness? So, I agree. We've got to comb the budgets because I think that the city government is doing more just in self-maintenance, spending more in self-maintenance. I mean, it's a great jobs creation tool, I guess, for city employees, but I'm not dissing city employees at all. I believe that, when you want to get something fixed, you go to the people that are doing the work, and so the public employees are the tool. But the administration above the public employees is where I think we need to really take a look, and the Department of Homelessness is one of those.
Okay, thank you. So as we come to a close here this evening, I would like to once again thank the Delridge Neighborhoods Development Association and Youngstown Cultural Arts Center for hosting us. I was also negligent earlier in recognizing our CEO of the Chamber, Lynn Dennis. Thanks for all that you do for us, Lynn. And I'd like to once again thank our timekeeper extraordinaire for the evening, Mr. Keller. I'd also like to thank everyone in the audience for coming out and participating tonight. And with that, I'd like to go to closing statements. And so 2 minutes each. So Bob, we'll start with you.
Well, I get a whole 2 minutes. Thank you. Stand for my close. Okay, thank you, Sensei. I would very much appreciate your support of this election. We're all good people sitting here in front of you. There are no bad choices. I believe, though, that I bring a resume that suits me for Seattle. Being a former Bernie delegate, as I mentioned to you, I believe in bringing government back to the people themselves. I think that we've lost control of our own city government people. Everywhere I go throughout the city, doesn't matter if it's West Seattle, South, Southeast, Northeast, Northwest, everybody feels like decisions are being made by some mystery person like the Wizard of Oz behind a curtain, and then decisions are magically pummeled on top of us. And we need to fix that. There is so much cynicism in our political system right now that if we allow those powers that be that keep dividing us through cynicism and driving us away from the one tool that empowers us to win back our quality of life and fairness and justice and sense of vision of what we want our city to be, we're going to lose control of it. So we have to reground our democracy back in the people. That's what I'm all about. That being said, I have a plan to implement not just these political reforms in how government is structured, but in how to bring our whole city forward so that we can once again be a city of, by, and for the people, not just a city of, by, and for the people with money. So I want to create the publicly owned municipal bank, which will provide us great capacity to deal with these financing issues, because that's a lot of what the solutions boil down to, our inability to finance them. We keep going back to the regressive taxes. I'm calling for a moratorium on regressive taxes. If we're gonna ask for more money, first off, we need transparency and accountability for the money we're getting. And then we should go for progressive sources, not regressive. Appreciate your vote.
Mike McGinn?
I wanted to stand for my clothes. That's why I did that, Bob. We've been sitting the whole time. I always feel better when I stand on a clothes. So I spoke a little bit about, why I got involved in the first place. I was really active in the Sierra Club, and my wife used to say, after we had kids, I seemed to take it more seriously, and I think I did. Climate change was what really motivated me. I was really active in my neighborhood, working to get sidewalks and dealing with development and going to endless meetings, kind of like Pete does. And those things led me to more and more work. It led me to the mayor's office, which was one hell of a hard job. And I had to learn on the job. I had to learn what it meant to deal with a budget in crisis, to get people aligned with the values, to go out in public and take questions. And I think I learned a lot. I think I'm a little older, a little wiser, and I'm definitely a little more humble from the experience. And so people might say, why would you do this again? And trust me, there are mornings when I get up to start another campaign day where I ask myself the same question. But this type of forum, being in the community, talking to people about what we care about and how we're going to get there, that's what gets me up. That's what gets me up. And I still care about this planet we're going to leave to our kids and this future we're going to have. And I still believe in Seattle, ultimately. I really believe this is a special place. I believe we are idealistic. I think that if anybody's going to deal with these issues of equity and race and social justice and getting ahead of the climate crisis, isn't it us, right?
Yeah.
Isn't it us? Aren't we the people that are supposed to get ahead of this? So that's what you know who I am, I think, I say what I believe. I'm never going to cut a deal with the powerful because it's politically expedient. I'm going to guarantee you that. I'm always going to listen. I'll be in the community. I'm not perfect, but I'm always going to try to do what's best for our city and for our kids and for our future. Thank you.
Thank you. Cary Moon, you have the first word and you have the last word.
Thank you, Pete, and thank you, West Seattle, for coming out to talk about the future of our city. There is nothing I like more than talking about how to be the place we all know we can be. So I've been on the stage with these guys and the other candidates many, many times, as you can imagine, and I have to say that the three of us and Nikita Oliver have very similar values. We really care about people. We really care about building a city that works for the well-being of everyone. We really care about racial justice, economic justice, and real bold solutions. None of us are beholden to the status quo. None of us are beholden to the corporate elite who like to run this town. But I want to tell you how I'm different. I am an urban planner. I am a problem solver. I started my campaign putting out a vision and a platform of solutions because I believe we need a different kind of politics in this city. We have had the politics of power struggle and domination for too long. We need politics that are about a constructive future vision and inviting everybody to be part of the solution. I'm a collaborative leader. I'm a person that likes to collaborate, likes to work with one another, likes to build trust and build a sense of discovery of what can we do together, what can we achieve together. And I think in this time of transformation and flux that our city's going through, where we all wonder, where are we headed? Who's in charge? Am I going to be able to afford to live here? Are my kids going to be able to live here? What is Seattle becoming? I think we need the kind of leader who can pull people together towards a shared vision, because the only way we're going to solve these big problems of affordability, of wealth inequality, of an economy that's generating profits but only a few of us get access to them, we need to all work together and we need to all understand what the plan is, what the metrics are. We need a transparent and an accountable leader to guide us through that process. And that is the kind of leader I am. I'm from a small business family. My family's business won the award for the best place to work in the state of Michigan as an example of how I believe leadership should function. And so I want to bring that expertise to the mayor's office, and I would really love your vote. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Cary Moon. Thank you, Michael McGinn. Thank you, Bob Hasegawa. Thanks to our audience. And the next task for everyone is make sure that you vote.